physically, yes, it was an easy race for him. Do you think that was an easy race for him emotionally and in terms of his stress level? Absolutely not. And that was the story of how he overcame all that and how he got out of that car and just stood there in exultation with his helmet still on, the visor down, probably because he had tears in his eyes and didn't want people to see it. And the rest of the movie then took place after that. And I think for anybody not to feel that, as I say, you might as well go off and look at some other sport because you don't have the right feel for Formula One. The more this season goes on, with him effectively being the number 2 now, because obviously Mercedes are going to be working with George and trying to get the best from George for the future, for their future. It's going to get worse, not better, probably, because Lewis is going to start, he's going to start thinking, well, this is a bit of a weird year for me. And whether or not he then goes to Ferrari as the Lewis Hamilton that we saw at his peak at Mercedes, it's a big, unanswered question right now, I think, and particularly with the confidence now that Charles getting.
With McLaren converging, and so too Ferrari, does Christian Horner have a decision to make around Checo Perez very soon, Peter? Hello and welcome to yet another iteration of the F1 Hour. With me, as always, my friend, your friend, the go-toest F1 mind in F1 history, the one, the only, Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, sir?
Well, after that intro, Cameron, how can I be? I'm very happy. Thank you very much. Very kind of you.
Your humility will never let me get away with it, Peter, but it's obligatory at this point. Shall we talk some F1-age?
Why not? Yeah, absolutely. Had a great race yesterday, I think.
Let's talk about it, Peter, because you're the only person that I've heard in the space say anything positive about the Monaco Grand Prix that was. Why/how did you ingest it that way, sir?
Well, I can't see how that wasn't a great race. It was the occasion, the expectation of Charles finally winning at home. Ferrari winning Monaco is always a massive thing. Normally, it's a fairly boring race with a guy out front, everybody impossible to overtake and big gaps. We had 4 cars covered by 4 seconds. Out on the circuit, there's no way in the world anybody can tell the difference between a lap, whether it's 4 seconds a lap slower or 4 seconds a lap quicker. The Formula One cars still are unbelievably impressive wherever they are on the Monaco circuit, whether they're going into the swimming pool, whether they're going into Rascasse, when they're going at the top of the hill. The spectacle was amazing, and I thought it was one of the best Monaco Grand Prix we've had for a long time. Mind you, I'm not one of these people that goes around counting overtakes and defines racing on the number of overtakes. Most of them are artificial anyway on most circuits. And there's never any overtaking at Monaco anyway. So what does it matter? The word racing is not really one you use for Monaco. It's a different event. And for the event that Monaco is on the calendar to be, it was a perfect rendition of Monaco. I just thought it was fabulous from beginning to end. And to have the Prince in tears at the end on the podium. I mean, talk about an absolute gift to TV producers and directors. That was just pure Hollywood, which is where it all started anyway with Grace Kelly. So I thought it was just an amazing event.
I think the internationally syndicated broadcast, Peter, in hindsight, missed the trick. I've gone back and listened to a couple of different streams, the Italian one particularly. Again, they can't manufacture racing if that's what 90% of the F1 fan base are interested in, but particularly the climax around Charles and it's Jules Bianchi and the history of Charles and Charles' dad, and I think what the internationally syndicated broadcast missed was that, right, the romanticism of Charles finally getting over the hump. What do you reckon?
Well, yeah, and you say 90% of the fan base want close racing. Well, actually, Netflix has shown that 90% of the fan base, the global fan base, actually want human stories, and they really want to know about emotion. They really want to know what goes behind a win and a driver pulling off that win. And so that was what the focus needed to be. It needed to be on Charles. It needed to be on Charles and everything he was going through, and the 2 attempts before from the pole and not winning, and finally winning this time with a yellow McLaren in his mirrors throughout the race. It was just brilliant. It couldn't be better TV. And if anybody didn't make it that, then I don't know what they do need in order to create great television. I thought it was absolutely fabulous.
Don't disagree, Peter, but we're into the weeds now of translating, in essence, human story. Peter, I think your gift and your curse, if I'm honest. I think you're like Max Verstappen when they pitched at him in the pre-race press conference. What is it that makes you so good, Max? How comes you beat all the other 19 so easily? And Peter, I think if I translate that to your style of broadcasting, that you do that effortlessly, right, translating the human story. And I think comparing and contrasting your stream post race as versus the internationally syndicated broadcast that I watch, you managed to bring that Charles Leclerc romanticism to life in a way that sadly the guys and gals at Sky F1 just didn't. How what's the difference, Peter? How do you, as a broadcaster, as a journalist who prides himself on integrity and story, how do you do that?
Well, it's a very convoluted subject, Cameron, and very sweet of you to raise it. I can't speak about the Sky guys because, as I say, I don't really watch Sky anyway. I live in Spain, and here I am in France, Monaco, so into that. But I think for me, Formula One has always been about people. And it's not to say that I don't enjoy the technology or love the technology. I do. But I love the human side of the technology. And I love, if I'm thinking about Adrian Newey, I don't necessarily think about some strake that he's put on the underfloor. I think about Adrian as a human being and how his brain works, or I try to imagine how his brain works. And I think it's the same with drivers. I think we live in a very departmentalized world now of short sound bites, very, very short news grabs that sum up a situation, of interviews where the questioner has 4 or 5 questions that they have to get in because they've been box ticked by the team and by the producer. And even if the subject has already covered that next point in his first answer, they still go to the next point because they haven't even been listening to what he's saying. And that's the world in which we live at the moment. And I come from a different era, maybe I hope it's a different world, because I try to listen to what people say. I try to look into their eyes. I try to think about who they are, what they've achieved, where they've come from, and what pressures they're under right now in order to deliver. And it wasn't difficult to go to Monaco this year and know that the only thing that really was of the essence was Charles Leclerc, and could he win his home Grand Prix finally? He's got his garage sorted in terms of the engineers. The team's done a very good job over the winter of compromise technically on that car, taking a bit of top speed out of it, giving it more slow speed, downforce, a larger sweet spot in which to play, all of which I've been talking about a lot since the start of the year. And here was the perfect race for them, and it happened to be Charles' circuit. And so that was the story. There was no doubt that was the story. And I think anybody that didn't grab that really should go off and watch water polo or something, because that is what Formula One is all about. It's all about that emotion. And as you say, it's about his dad. And I think, you learn from other people in life, don't you? Human beings learn from one another, hopefully. And to watch Charles, how he reacted and how he moved forward from the passing of his father that weekend in Baku, to me, was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. Forget motor racing, just as one human being to another. And then obviously he's also gone through a lot of pain with Jules Bianchi and with Antoine Hubert as well. And he's handled that with enormous dignity. And I'm intrigued to know how he can be so strong. And I just was 100% wanting him to win that Grand Prix, because I know how much it means to him and to all the people around it. That was the story. And if I was the director of a TV show of that race, that's how I would have done it. Absolutely. It would have been totally Charles Leclerc. Can he pull it off? And he did. It was just an amazing, and he pulled it off with this incredible train of cars behind him. How often do we have 4 cars covered by 4 seconds in the lead of the Monaco Grand Prix? I can't remember the last time that's happened, to be honest. Usually it's a sort of walk away win. And then a few mix-ups with the pit stops or whatever. But this was an amazing event. And I was out there with the crowd, and they just loved it. It was, just brilliant.
You've made a believer out of me, Peter. And I in real time, I really really disliked that Grand Prix. I found very little redeeming feature, but hearing the likes of Alex Jakes wax lyrical in the closing stages convinced me that potentially there was redeeming feature in the Charles Leclerc story that had probably gone over my head. But hey, you speak about Adrian Newey, Peter. Have we seen peak oil theory as far as Red Bull dominance? Are the issues that Max Verstappen's talking about, as in curb riding, having to run the RB20 too stiff to optimise for the anti-dive and anti-squat malleable platform? Are you expecting the gap between RB20 and McLaren and Ferrari to only converge between now and the end of the season?
Yeah, I've been saying that from the start of last year, let alone this year. Obviously, with the regulations coming up against a brick wall at the end of 2025, there's a limit to what even Adrian can do within these regulations, because you just can't go any further with it. And if he's somewhere near that limit now, then it stands to reason that all the other big teams should be very near him already. Ferrari and McLaren done a very good job. Mercedes still lagging badly in that area, and Aston Martin. But having said that, I still think the philosophy of the Red Bull and the top speed they can get into that car is still the right philosophy for the entire championship. If you look at the average layout of all the circuits over 2024, it's still going to be a very good car. And I think it'll be a very good car in Canada and Barcelona. Of course, when you do have to compromise the car and you're at a circuit where one of its great things, i.e. it's a top speed, can't be utilized, and you've really got to focus on everything else, there are going to be compromises now, and that's what we're seeing. And it's compromising the ride and in high downforce and the level at which they're having to run with terms of stiffness, and they're not being able to get the traction they want, and curb riding, obviously. But I think when everybody else is having to trim the car out to get more top speed again, that's when you'll see the Red Bull coming back into its sweet spot. And it's as far as Max goes, I mean, he's a racing driver. He wants to win every Grand Prix. And I don't know a racing driver in the world who, when he's got a good car and he's suddenly at a circuit where it's not going very well, feels deep down that he needs to make sure the engineers know that, and they're really on edge and they're really going to get the car right for the next race. It's just a normal racing driver thing. I mean, there's nothing unusual about that. If Max was saying, oh, well, I'm not really worried, the car's really, it's going to be brilliant in Canada, brilliant in Spain, brilliant in Silverstone, I don't really care about Monaco. I mean, he's never going to say that. He's always going to say, oh, we got to be on our edge, maybe they're getting near us. He's trying to get the whole team up again, and it's normal. That's what you'd expect him to do. He's a racing driver.
Yeah, fair. It's an interesting one from Max. And again, Ted Kravitz on the internationally syndicated broadcast teed Max's scapegoating of the car as a potential exit strategy, that maybe Mercedes could be in that offing. Again, rumour that Red Bull powertrain is potentially some years behind that of Mercedes and Ferrari ahead of the 2026 rules and regs. What do you think about that, sir?
Well, I don't understand it at all. He doesn't need a scapegoat. If he wants to leave Red Bull, it's pretty clear why he'll leave. It's because Adrian Newey's left. Why does he need to create any other thing? I mean, the truth and the reality is there. Adrian is not staying with Red Bull. And so there's every reason for Max to be thinking, for him to be a bit concerned about the future and what he might be doing, because so far in his life, his Formula One life, he's been completely in harmony with Adrian Newey. So it's a big change for him. And that's logical as well. He doesn't need to start trashing the car in order to have an excuse to leave. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me at all. And the other point, I think, is that I know quite a lot of the people at Red Bull Powertrain. I was impressed by the number of Ford people here this weekend at Monaco. I think for anybody to get out there and say that the Red Bull Powertrain Ford Association is way behind Mercedes is just playing with fire. I think that's again a ludicrous thing to be saying at this stage. It may turn out to be correct, but I don't think there's any evidence at all to suggest that. And if I was within the Red Bull fold right now, I'd be feeling very comfortable with the people working there, the talent they've got, and the job they've done already with Honda on that engine, and how good they are. Yes, if Adrian's leaving, that may have an impact on powertrain. It may. But they've got a good stack of people there. And I think that engine will be very good in 26.
Here is hoping, Mr. Windsor. Talk to me about the incident between K-Mag, Hulkenberg and Checo Perez, because many people see that many different ways. I personally thought that K-Mag yet again was at fault, 100% culpable for that incident by virtue of the fact that he shouldn't be up there. It's a very, I think he's miscalculated his risk to reward there by being there. But I know you think differently, right, Peter? You reckon it might be?
I do. I think it's quite easy to blame K-Mag because he gets involved in so much stuff. So that's the first thing, a sort of trend hashtag, K-Mag again or whatever. But if you're in the middle, you're the guy that it behoves you to be aware of the diminishing space in front of you. And if you've got two white cars either side, regardless of whether you're slightly ahead of one or slightly behind the other, and you know the track is narrowing and you know that it's weaving as well ahead of you, you're in the middle of the sandwich. It behoves you to make sure there's no contact. Yeah, you can start looking at all three of them and say, if Kevin hadn't been there, there would have been a lot more room for Checo to move to the right, and maybe he should have backed away. Same with Nico Hulkenberg. If Nico hadn't been forcing the issue with Perez wouldn't necessarily have had to move to the right so much. I mean, this is an easy thing to say, but from Nico Hulkenberg's perspective, I don't know. I mean, if you're really thinking sharply, you'd think this isn't Daniel Ricciardo in the middle. This is Checo Perez. It's a bit of a loose cannon. And the best thing here probably is just to back away slightly, just to make sure that if Perez does move to the right, he's got a bit of room to go back or whatever. And that didn't happen. Everybody was just there. And it was just like 3-2, as I said in my video. And I personally don't think you can blame Kevin Magnussen because he came out on the right and he couldn't go any further to the right. What do you want him to do? Just back out of the throttle and let Perez go? I mean, it wasn't his position to have to back out of the throttle. He was there doing the right thing, staying as far as he could to the right, not in any way coming to the left. So I think the decision made by the stewards is probably the right one. But I come back to my point of reading the driver that's near you. And if it's Kevin Magnussen down inside, you think about him differently than another driver, because we know, he's a hard, tough driver. And equally with Perez, that he's quite capable of sort of moving the car quite a lot and not being as predictable as, say, a Daniel Ricciardo in that situation. Yeah, so a lot of it is reading the other driver and being aware of the potential of what can happen. And that's my take on it. I can't say any more than that, really.
I agree with you. I think that K-Mag, just the road there kind of sweeps right and then sweeps left, right. And I just think K-Mag was descending to a gap that was always going to close. And being K-Mag, being already on 10 points on his super license,
he wasn't going into a gap. He was just following the flow of the road. And that isn't, don't forget, that's the straight so far as the right foot is concerned. It's flat there. And it's not as if, we're talking about going into corners now and leaving a gap. He's just following the little bit of curb on the side there and staying absolutely on the right. He's not going for a gap. He's just doing what the road dictates he should be doing without impinging on anybody else's space.
It's a good shout. Talk to me very quickly. I'm conscious of time, Peter. Talk to me very quickly about Checo Perez, because I thought there was an interesting dynamic playing out in the team principals press conference this week. When asked about Checo Perez's performance / underperformance today, Christian Horner was having none of it. He spoke very highly about Checo Perez's performance season to date, as if the turn one incident a couple of races back hadn't happened. It was really, really weird. And then the rumour, of course, is that Christian Horner has a debt of gratitude to pay back to Checo Perez, since he was the only Red Bull driver that supported him unequivocally in his time of need during those allegations. With McLaren converging, and so too Ferrari, does Christian Horner have a decision to make around Checo Perez very soon, Peter?
Only if he wants Carlos Sainz in that car. Only if he thinks that he's possibly going to need to ramp up the overall pace combined of the two drivers together as a combination. And he may well be thinking that. And people at Red Bull may well be thinking that. I don't buy all that other stuff. I don't think that I think it's so easy to read a lot of things into events that aren't real. And I mean, a far truer thing would be if Sergio Perez, I'm only suggesting this might be the case, but Sergio Perez has said, oh, by the way, Texel want to increase by 30% next year. In which case, Christian Horner would be saying, yeah, Checo, wonderful, doing a brilliant job, wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he? You know, it's usually about money in life, isn't it? Let alone in Formula One. And it comes down to what do you expect from that other car? As I say, now that dynamic has changed because Adrian's leaving, and it may not be that Red Bull will have so much domination in the future, in which case maybe you do want to have a slightly quicker guy in the other car. Maybe you want to have Carlos back in that other car. I think that's the only issue. And he's had two, I mean, Miami first corner, yeah, it was, but I don't think you could put that as a black mark against Perez. It was what quick guys do sometimes. You know, we've seen Lewis do that. We've seen Fernando do that. Perez did it. Okay, but I think Imola and Monaco are two terrible races for Sergio Perez, and that is much more of an issue. You could argue at Imola that he actually played the teammate game quite well by holding up Lando. And at Monaco was just a disaster, wasn't it? He was just not there at all. When the car was difficult, you can just see how good Max Verstappen is alongside Sergio Perez. But again, that's just one race. So it'll only take Perez to have a good Canadian Grand Prix or Spanish Grand Prix or Baku or whatever. And all of a sudden they'll be saying sweetness and light, you know, welcome, stay with the team. So everybody's got very short focus. And they're all looking for little subjects about which to talk in all of these press conferences. That's why I'm not a fan of those press conferences anyway. It's like you have to ask a question. Oh, let's ask something that might get us on the back page of the sports section or whatever it is. And you get all these little things going on. And to me, it's all a bit contrived. And you've got to keep an overall picture of where we're at. And the big issue is, in my mind, is Carlos Sainz. You know, what is the future for Carlos Sainz? And here is a driver that, you know, given the amount of pressure he was under at Monaco, with obviously it being a Leclerc weekend, but he still had to do a great job for Ferrari. He's the sort of guy that's potentially going to touch a wall or two the way he drives. He had to make sure that didn't happen at any stage. And then he has to make sure he gets the best possible result out of the car. He almost got that. Okay, he didn't get P2, but he got P3, which was pretty nice for Ferrari. And we've got some good circuits coming up for him now as well in terms of the way he drives the car. So the big question is what is going to happen to Carlos Sainz, I think. And still, you know, that's an unanswered question. I know there's a lot of talk about Williams. I mean, if you're going to think about talking about driving for Williams, you might as well drive for Sauber and then take the Audi deal. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, you might say, oh, I want the Mercedes engine, or they promised me this or promised me that. But I think from Carlos right now, I don't even think it's a question of money. I think it's a question of what is the best thing for his career. And I really feel for him. I really do. And to see his dad there, who's had such a great rallying career, he's gone through some terribly difficult moments as well, but come through them and been very successful. And you get the feeling that's going to happen somehow. But how's it going to happen? You know, that's still an unanswered question. That, to me, is something that everybody should be talking about all the time.
Yeah, I think for Carlos, the word on the F1 curb is that Audi are potentially the hires up aren't racing people, and that potentially they're doomed to make the mistakes like, I don't know, say a Toyota made, that they won't understand the F1 properly, and that Carlos Sainz's career will be wasting away, particularly in the first years of that startup of an F1 team, and potentially might be better placed from 2026 through 2028 to sign a 2-3 year deal with James Vowles maybe, because at the very least, Peter, to your point, they're racing people, right? Because success in F1 is a function.
I'm slightly revising my opinion about that, to be honest. So if you want racing people, I can think of teams that come more under the heading of racers than Williams right now, to be honest. And I still haven't got over the shock of not having that spec car in Australia. You know, running out of tires and things like that. It's just a weird feel to that team, and they don't need a Carlos Sainz at the moment. They need a much better fabric in terms of practicality and getting on with it and really having racing in their blood. I think that's I'm only talking about the top management. I'm talking about the guys on the ground, because you don't ever have to doubt those. But so for me, Williams would not be the answer for that.
Oof.
If you want to take that sort of plunge, you'd be better off trying to get back into the Red Bull fold and maybe driving one of the Visa Cash App cars instead of Daniel or something like that.
Wow.
But they're much more racers, in my view, than Williams right now.
Wow. Good shout. Don't hate it. Go on then, Peter. Let me talk to you about Lewis, as painfully as that might be this race weekend, because again, this is a subject that divides the community. I was concerned with Lewis over the course of the weekend in some of his interviews. Lewis normally very kind of PR sensitive, just gives the exam answer right. And this was the first weekend where you can kind of hear and see the acrimony that you've spoken about, that you predicted for the better part of 36 months at Mercedes, kind of bubbling to the surface. This time, Lewis insinuating that he will never out-qualify George Russell this season, that potentially now in his swan song at Mercedes, that Toto and James Allison are favouring George Russell. What do you make of that, Peter? Is that just standard fare for an F1 team when they have a star driver leaving him, or is it something more insidious, do you think?
No, it's nothing more insidious than that. It's totally logical. He's going to Ferrari, and now in terms of the future of the team and ongoing development of the car and the next upgrade, if there's any one, obviously it's all going to go to George. And Lewis would have known that from the millisecond he signed the Ferrari deal. There's nothing unusual there. And he's probably just responding to questions of people saying, what do you think about your situation at Mercedes now? And we all know what his situation at Mercedes is. You don't need to ask the question. I was slightly, to be honest with you, putting aside all the interview stuff, because I think that's another thing just on the point of how we look at Formula One in general and how we cover Formula One. A lot of it is covered on the basis of what drivers say in these very short sound bites, usually in response to fairly trivial questions. And not much of it is based on what is going on the racetrack and how the drivers are actually doing their job in the race car. Very little of it, indeed. I was actually quite perplexed by Lewis over the weekend. And I made this point in, I think, the Friday video I did, which is a fairly short one, that he's finally in a car where at Monaco, without a long straight and the setup they've got, it's half reasonable. And he's feeling pretty good in the car in terms of balance and grip and feeling the surface of the road for the first time, maybe in 2 years, and starting to enjoy himself. But I was a bit shocked, to be honest, at how little he looked like the Lewis of his championship years. He wasn't driving the way even Oscar Piastri is driving the McLaren right now in terms of getting into the corner in a really short way with a beautiful transition, which is what that was his trademark, has been ever since Formula 2, GP2. And he was doing that on a couple of corners. As I said, he was doing that into Tabac, and I was watching him at Tabac quite a lot, and he looked really good into Tabac. And yet Rascassi just seemed to be leaving a little bit of margin that was never there when he was driving the Merc at its peak or the McLaren. And I just wonder if he's been driving this bad Mercedes for so long now, whether it's kind of got into his DNA almost, and it's something that's going to be quite difficult to get rid of. And it's going to be, the more this season goes on, with him effectively being the number two now, because obviously Mercedes are going to be working with George and trying to get the best from George for the future, for their future. It's going to get worse, not better, probably, because Lewis is going to start, he's going to start thinking, well, this is a bit of a weird year for me. And whether or not he then goes to Ferrari as the Lewis Hamilton that we saw at his peak at Mercedes is a big, unanswered question right now, I think, and particularly with the confidence now that Charles getting. So, yeah, I was a bit, that was the Lewis story for me, that sort of rather strange way he was putting the lap together. And I think it kind of showed under pressure at the end, although there was very little margin between them when it came down to it. And maybe you could say that was the difference between the new wing that George had and Lewis didn't. But it didn't look as if Lewis, as the weekend progressed, it didn't look as if he was as comfortable in the car and what he was doing as he had been on Friday, when it was kind of a pleasant surprise at how good it was. So let's see how it goes in the upcoming races for Lewis. Yeah, from his point of view, this whole Ferrari thing is absolutely brilliant. It couldn't have happened at a better time in his career. He's got that to look forward to. It's been a miserable last couple of years at Mercedes, and you can't in any way fault him for accepting that offer and taking that plunge and giving that revitalization to his career at the back end of it. But as I said before, Ferrari, in my view, don't actually need Lewis Hamilton. They've really got a great team at the moment, and it's kind of unsettling, this whole thing, in the way it's changed the world of Carlos Sainz.
Peter, let me counter at you. This is my big fear as a Lewis Hamilton fan, because Lewis Hamilton evangelists will say that because Lewis doesn't have the car underneath him, you're always going to lose a portion, right? The adverse variance is a function of Lewis not being confident in the car. My counter to that, with my objective truth cap on, however, is if you struggle to outqualify George Russell in equal machinery, in 2025, there is no magic bullet for qualifying pace. Charles is ostensibly materially quicker than George Russell. So how's that going to parlay then, Peter? That's my concern, right? I don't know how that's going to play out positively for my driver, Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton.
Yeah, I think the way you need to think of that is that if the Mercedes was a very, very good car and had been the Red Bull for the last 2 years, I think Lewis's qualifying pace would be right up there with George's. And that's why I've always said, in some ways, it's a good thing for Mercedes that they've had a bad car, because they have absolutely no managerial ability to be able to handle a Lewis and George fight if they're in a championship winning car and the world championship's at stake and there's 1 point between them going into Abu Dhabi. No, forget it. There is no way they could manage that, let alone, even halfway through the year. So because the car has not been a great car, that has not been in focus. And as I've said all along, that because this Mercedes has been such a dog for the last 2 years, well, that's been kind, because Dexter's got great handling. This is my dog. He's got unbelievable reflexes and balance, and probably much better than the Mercedes. No, but because the Mercedes has not been a good car, Lewis naturally, anybody that thinks that Lewis in a bad car is going to be as quick as George Russell, again, doesn't understand Formula One. Why would he be with 7 world championships and all that road dust and experience? There's no way, if it's a knife-edgy car on a 5th gear corner with the back end about to jump out on this bump, but if you take it flat, you're going to get an extra 10th. Why is Lewis going to do that? He's going to let George get on with it, isn't he? But if it was a great car, I think he would have been right there. So I don't think you should. I think in Lewis's mind, he's thinking, when I'm at Ferrari, it'll be a great car. If it's a great car, I'll be right there with Charles. That's for sure what he's thinking. Now, we as observers can say, not sure about that. I think Charles might be a 10th quicker here or a 10th quicker there. We can make those observations. That's the fun part of Formula One. We just don't know. In my opinion, there are going to be some things that Lewis does when he goes to Ferrari better than Charles out of the box. And there are going to be some things where Lewis looks at Charles and he thinks, wow, that's impressive. I'm going to have to up my game a bit there. And I think they'll chime off one another quite well, because they're both intelligent, they're both mature, and they're both good people. So I think in that sense, it's a very good team. And I think you'll see Lewis lifting his game when he goes to Ferrari, because he won't go there blinkered like Fernando Alonso going to McLaren for the first time and thinking he's going to conquer the world and being shocked by how good Lewis is. I think it's going to be Lewis going there with his eyes open, thinking, I've still got something to learn. This guy Leclerc is very good, and I want to know what makes him so good. And that's what makes Lewis Hamilton so good. It's what makes Oscar Piastri so good. They are always thinking, they're open-minded, and Max for that matter, about how to improve. Some drivers on the grid are just totally blinkered. I'm the best. If I'm not winning a race, I'm not on the pole, must be the fault of the engineer or the car or the tires or whatever. But not those ones I just mentioned. Those guys are self-critical, and Lewis has always been a self-critical driver, and that's why he's as good as he is.
You give me optimism, Mr. Windsor.
Yeah, absolutely. You should be. Lewis would not be doing this unless he felt that. Now, it could well be at his age, maybe his peripheral vision is 1% less than it was 20 years ago. Maybe his reflexes aren't quite as sharp. I doubt it, to be honest. I don't think he'd be doing it unless he knew physically he was 100% there. So I think you can be pretty optimistic that he's going to learn from Charles, and he's going to have his day against Charles.
Let's go, Mr. Windsor. I sincerely hope so. You've been super generous with your time. So can I ask you one final one super quickly? Sure. Around Monaco, friend of the channel, Macon, says, are the cars simply too big? And is proof positive of that the fantastic back and forth blood and guts race that we got in F2 this weekend just passed.
Yeah, full marks to Oliver Behrman. I mean, wow,
Oh
from where
my
he was on the
gosh,
grid
Peter.
to finish fourth, but two great passes and one on the great Kimi as well, on the outside of Mirabeau to give him the inside run into the hairpin.
Talk to me about that, Peter, because I was
Well, yeah, I mean,
impressive.
Yeah, I don't want to detract from Zach O'Sullivan because he won the race and Williams won a race, Williams driver. But, it was pretty lucky, wasn't it?
Mm.
So, yeah, I thought Berman was really good. And his pass on Bashir was really good as well. He's definitely a George Russell, isn't he, Oliver Berman? And, I look forward to having a regular seat in Formula One. Kind of sad just on that subject, seeing Liam Lawson staring at a monitor all day. But anyway, that's another subject. No, are the cars? Yeah, of course the cars are much too big for Monaco. Again, another good reason to say this was a great Grand Prix, because 4 cars nose to tail around Monaco. Doesn't matter if they're 4 seconds off the pace. The public can't tell that. As I've said a million times, they're still quite capable, thank you very much, of having a massive shunt going up the hill, quick enough to do that, quick enough to hit guardrails, quick enough to make mistakes, and a bunch of cars, big, heavy, annoying Formula One cars. I say annoying because they're big and heavy, all bunched together for the lead. It's an impressive sight. And the fact that these guys can manhandle these cars around Monaco is also pretty impressive, I think. Yeah, of course, we love to see agility. We love to see sliding, but if you want that, go and watch reruns of Lewis Hamilton at Macau or Ayrton Senna at Macau. Sadly, those days are over and they ain't going to happen again. But here's an interesting one. Bear in mind that for a long time, let's go back to the 60s, they used to limit the number of cars on the grid at Monaco to 16 because it was considered to be too tight for the large Formula One cars. We now have 20 cars on the circuit, and they're probably twice the size of the Grand Prix cars from the 60s.
Yeah.
Interesting point, huh?
Yeah. No, it's ironic, Peter. Super ironic, mate. I'd love these conversations, Mr. Windsor. You've been so generous of your time. I could talk your ears off for another 30 minutes. Ironically, I came to argue you down, Mr. Windsor, and tell you about how boring the Monaco Grand Prix was, but I've had to shut my mouth. You have
no,
me
not at all.
convinced.
I just haven't given you any opportunity to come back. That's all it is. I'm very good at dominating the conversation in terms of length, not necessarily content. But anyway, thanks for your kind comments.
In boxing terms, you've 1080'd me, Mr. Windsor. I just
think I like Formula One racing. I always love Formula One. I've always loved this world of motorsport. And when there have been enough bad moments in the history of Formula One, and there will be more in the future, believe me. But when good things happen, we should celebrate them and make the most of it. And if within this tiny little bubble of the paddock of Formula One and all these egocentric TV people are all saying, oh, look at the stats here, the cars are really slow, they're 4 seconds a lap slow, it's just like a parade, it's not a race. If in that tiny little bubble they're all thinking that, it doesn't mean to say that that is the message we should put out to the world at large. And I'm not saying we put out a false message, I'm just saying we look at the race from a different perspective. And we look at it the perspective of Charles Leclerc. Physically, yes, it was an easy race for him. Do you think that was an easy race for him emotionally? And in terms of his stress level, absolutely not. And that was the story of how he overcame all that and how he got out of that car and just stood there in exultation with his helmet still on, the visor down, probably because he had tears in his eyes and didn't want people to see it. And the rest of the movie then took place after that. And I think for anybody not to feel that, as I say, you might as well go off and look at some other sport because you don't have the right feel for Formula One if that's the case.
And then that bombshell, Mr. Windsor. Thank you so much once again for your time. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, be sure to smash a like and drop a comment. Share with your fellow F1 friends. If you're listening on a podcasting platform, do me a favour, follow and 5 stars. Go and subscribe to the Peter D. Windsor channel forthwith if you are not already. If you are not already, what are you doing with your life? And then shortly thereafter, go and follow 5-star the Peter D. Windsor podcast on all good podcasting platforms, the Short Corners podcast. Mr. Windsor, you're an absolute legend, sir. I've loved that conversation. Enlightening as per usual. Safe trip back to Spain, sir.
Thanks, Cameron. Thanks. Best wishes to you too.
As always, remember, chat, look, but never stare.